Cryptocurrency is a topic that has drawn a lot of attention from people. We've handpicked some of the best discussions on crypto from the Joe Rogan podcast for your enjoyment. Episode 1951 featuring CoffeeZilla, the pros and cons of crypto.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger, like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went down? Because it seems like they received additional scrutiny, right? Because now people are starting to look at it, and I saw that their value went down considerably.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that you can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on-chain all our assets. You can check yourself. Like, I have $1 billion in USDC. Well, that's great. But it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion in crypto, Bitcoin, whatever, if I owe $2 billion.
Right.
That's what ultimately matters is how much do you have on deposits that you owe out. And so with Binance, we don't really know. The only one we have a little bit more of a look into is Coinbase. It seems like they're, legitimate. But so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like outright the proceeds of criminals. I mean, we know that these criminals do launder their money through a lot of these crypto exchanges, through mixers. It's just sort of this big mess right now, and we're waiting for regulators to figure it out. Finally, regulators have stepped on the scene, but right now it's just this kind of wild, wild west of you're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? It's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's why the celebrities are important. And that's why
it's a huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part, yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there, so I can put my money
So
there.
is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin, it was like 70,000 or something like
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that one guy who lost a hard drive and who's paying people to go through a landfill to try to find his hard drive because there's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin on that hard drive.
Yeah, people lose their crypto keys all the time. I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea where you go, I'm going to get in before everyone else. But a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the most fair case you could make about crypto is sometimes national currencies aren't a great idea and you want an alternative. So look at the Turkish lira, right? The inflation rate, I think, is like 75% or something like that. It's an unimaginable, it's just out of control inflation. And if you hold on to your Turkish lira, you're in for a bad time because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want to store your money somewhere else, how do you store it? So there's this idea of these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that hey, if you're someone like me, I have 2 employees and both of them are overseas. One of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them and, I have to do this wire transfer and it's kind of expensive to do these, you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take 5 minutes or 3 minutes. So I don't want to give off the idea that there's nothing here. But the problem is that with the lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman, there's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams, and basically shell games where you're hiding the money.
Yeah.
You're saying, oh, invest in this. This is going to become valuable later, but you actually own a bunch of that token. Then you sell it off, and then the price plummets. So you thought you had a bunch of money, but actually it's worth nothing. Like, there's all these new scams that have emerged as a result of people getting interested in this idea of an alternative money system. I mean, yeah, especially in our modern age. I mean, it seems like you can understand where they're coming from, the average person. They're like, look, I've been screwed by the banks. Every time the government's printing a bunch of money, where do I go? Right? You can understand the appeal, but it's just like you went from the arms of one huckster to another. Like, it's almost to something worse. There are reasons that our banks have a bunch of anti-money laundering laws. There's a reason that they have all sorts of finance laws. It's not for their safety, it's for your safety. I mean, it's like they need to, fight. Like, one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that because, now if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank, now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
Episode 1251 featuring Jack Dorsey. The internet will have a currency.
Don't be evil in the Cash App's code of conduct. Maybe we should take it. It's open. It's free now.
One of our like equivalent operating principles within Cash and Square is how do we understand someone's struggle? Like, how do we understand, how do we have the empathy for, what they're struggling with? And, when it comes to finance, they're struggling with a lot.
Yeah.
Typically, they're struggling with a ton.
What was the thought process with, one of the things that's kind of cool about the Cash App is that you can buy and sell Bitcoin with it.
Yeah.
Are you guys going to consider other forms of cryptocurrency as well?
Not right now. So, back to the internet, I believe the internet will have a native currency.
Really?
It'll have a native currency. And I don't know if it's Bitcoin. I think it will, because just given all the tests it's been through and the principles behind it, how it was created, and it was something that was born on the internet, that was developed on the internet, that was tested on the internet. It is of the internet. And the reason we enabled the purchasing of Bitcoin within the Cash App is, one, we want to learn about the technology, and we want to put ourselves out there and take some risk. We're the first publicly traded company to actually offer it as a service. We're the first publicly traded company to talk to the SEC about Bitcoin and what that means. And it made us uncomfortable. We had to really understand what was going on, and that was critical and important. And then the second thing is that we would love to see something become a global currency. It enables more access. It allows us to serve more people. It allows us to move much faster around the world. And we thought we were going to start with how you can use it transactionally, but we noticed that people were treating it more like an asset, like a virtual gold, and we wanted just to make that easy, just the simplest way to buy and sell Bitcoin. But we also knew that it had to come with a lot of education. It had to come with constraint because, 2 years ago, people did some really unhealthy things about, purchasing Bitcoin. They maxed out their credit cards and put all their life savings into Bitcoin. So we developed some very simple restrictions and constraints, like you can't buy Bitcoin on the Cash App with a credit card. It has to be the money you actually have in it. And we look for day trading, which we discourage and shut down. That's not what we were trying to build. That's not what we were trying to optimize for. We made a children's book explaining what Bitcoin is and where it came from and how people use it and where it might be going. So we really tried to take on the role of education and to have some very simple, healthy constraints that allowed people to consider what their actions are in the space.
Now, when you have something like the Cash App, which is it's very much a disruptive technology in terms of decentralization of banks and currency, and to have it where everything is going right at, you're direct depositing a paycheck right in the app if you so choose. And then you could also buy Bitcoin, which is another disruptive technology. I mean, this is another step towards this sort of new way of doing things.
Yeah.
And is there pushback from any companies, or is there?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, like you just look at like some of the major banks and their consideration around Bitcoin. They all love blockchain because of the efficiencies it can create for their business and potentially new business lines. But I think there is a
explain blockchain to people for people who don't know what we're talking about.
Blockchain is a distributed ledger, and what that means is that it's basically a distributed database where the source of truth can be verified at any point around the network. And you can see, this annotation around how content or how around money like traveled.
So you don't have to go to an institution to get the records.
There's no centralized check. There's no centralized control over it. And I think that is threatening. It's certainly threatening to certain services behind banks and financial institutions. It's threatening to some governments as well. So I just look at this and like, how do we embrace this technology, not react to it in more from a threat standpoint, but like, what does it enable us to do, and where does our value shift? And that's what we should be talking about right now, is like how our value shifts. And there's always really strong answers to that question. But if you're not willing to ask the question in the first place, you will become irrelevant, because technology will just continue to march on and make you irrelevant. And it's the people that like are growing up with this technology, or born with the technology, only knowing that technology, or are asking the tough questions of themselves that they're going to be super disruptive to their business. And they're thinking about it right now, and they're taking actions. And we're doing that at Square, and we're doing that at Twitter. And like that to me represents longevity. That represents our ability to thrive. And we got to push ourselves. We got to make ourselves uncomfortable, and we got to disrupt what we held sacred and what we think is success today. Because otherwise, it's not going to be bigger than what we have today.
Episode 1921 featuring Peter Zeihan. Is crypto a scam?
Crypto.
Yeah, it was always a hot dumpster fire.
Always?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that it was all fraud. Some of it was a pyramid scheme. There's never been anything there. It serves no purpose. It's not a store of value. It's not a medium of exchange. And as we have seen, if you want it decentralized and not under government control, it is a haven for fraudsters. And now it is in the process of going to zero, except for Bitcoin, which will probably go negative, because if we're moving into a world with carbon taxes, you have to take into account the energy that it took to produce it in the first place.
Well, that's certainly playing out with like FTX.
Yeah.
Where you're finding out that
there'll be
it's
more.
A house of cards.
Yeah,
do you feel like that's just sort of opened the door for people to examine all of crypto now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like as soon as you have one of the big ones go down, it's just
go down catastrophically within a week.
Yeah, I mean, just there's no intrinsic value to this asset, and now it's starting to be priced appropriately. So it has what's Bitcoin at? 16,000. It has another 17,000 to go down.
Duh. Really?
Yeah. There's no intrinsic value to this product.
And do you think that people have just inherently like lost faith in the idea behind crypto because of FTX?
Well, it became an ideology. And whenever you invest based on an ideology, you're going to make some decisions that are a little divorced from math.
And what do you mean by ideology?
Well, the people who really like crypto are convinced that it's the currency of the future, and that a decentralized ledger is the way to go, and that anything that is controlled by a government entity is by definition a negative, and if it's done by the private sector freely, it will be better. And that's just not how currency works. Currency is a method of exchange and a store of value. And for that, there has to be a degree of trust, and you have to have it managed in terms of volume. I mean, one of the craziest things about Bitcoin is that there will never be more than X number of units of Bitcoin. Well, by default, that means it can't be used for trade, because the whole idea of economic activity is that there's expansion, which means you need more currency to lubricate and manage that expansion. If currency is locked in at a specific number, you get monetary inflation, and that is one of the fastest ways to destroy an economic model.
So because of the lack of Bitcoin, because there's a certain controlled number, the only thing that can happen is Bitcoin becomes more expensive.
Right. And that means that the people who hold it are the ones that make the money, but everyone else suffers. I'm sorry, that's not viable. The alternative is you have some private dude out there who generates the coins on a whim. How is that different from the monetary reserve or the monetary authorities that we have at the Federal Reserve, except for the point that there's no accountability? No.
Now, a lot of people have concern that the United States is trying to generate a centralized digital currency that they will control.
The Federal Reserve disagrees with that statement.
What do you mean?
Well, they don't see a purpose. They don't see what need it fills. So there may be an argument for the Chinese doing a digital yuan so they can monitor each and every transaction. But, conspiracy theorists are going to conspiracy. That's just what
I
they
was
do.
reading like mainstream articles about the United States confirming that they're trying to develop a
Now,
centralized
if
digital
you're talking
currency.
about a digital exchange system, then I can see that.
See if you can find something
But
like
something
that.
separate from the USD, no.
This is what I only looked at the headlines of it because someone was sending it around and I didn't have the time because it was yesterday. But this idea of a centralized digital currency is something that Maxine Waters talked about. She said that we have to do that in order to compete with China.
Yeah, Maxine Waters is not exactly the brightest person in Congress.
That's not saying a lot.
Yeah, I know it's a low bar, but she passes it.
I don't know if this is I'm just pulling up to see if this is what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
digital dollar is something that makes sense. The idea of smoothing the connections within the plumbing of the financial system or moving beyond a physical currency at all, that all makes sense. That's kind of like the next step. But a separate currency where everything is mitigated or managed by the Fed, that's not something the Federal Reserve has an interest in.